there, fans of the strange, dark, and mysterious. If you're into stories that make your skin crawl and keep you up at night, then buckle up, because this one's a doozy. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? Next story. The Reflection. Ethan Cole, 34, a freelance videographer, drove into Port Angeles, Washington to film an abandoned ranger outpost for a History Channel. He brought Mara Denton, 29, a county archivist, because she knew old land records and forgotten trail maps. Deputy Owen Rusk, 41, met them at a diner, since the sheriff wanted someone nearby if trouble started. What none of them expected was a string of reports about a reflection that did not match the person standing there. Those reports were never logged as paranormal, but they kept showing up in notes that did not agree. The outpost sat on the Olympic Peninsula foothills, a weathered structure facing a shallow pond, locals called Mirror Pool. State records listed it as decommissioned in 2011, yet archived notes suggested crews still visited through 2019. Ethan's plan was simple: capture quiet footage, record a calm narration, then leave before dark. Mara wanted to photograph the old bulletin boards, since county files mentioned missing equipment and disputed repairs. Owen agreed to stay within radio range because dispatch logs showed repeated calls from that trailhead during the past 6 years. On the first afternoon, the pond looked ordinary. A flat gray surface with alder branches bending over the waterline. Ethan set his camera low, aiming toward the outpost and its cracked windows, so the pond filled the lower frame. Mara walked the perimeter, reading faded postings about fire danger and bear canisters, while Owen checked for fresh tire tracks. The only sound was wind moving through hemlock needles and distant traffic from the highway. Still, Mara said she felt watched, not by a person, but by something that tracked her position carefully. Inside, the outpost was stripped of most furniture, yet one object remained: a tall rectangular mirror bolted to a wall. The mirror had no frame, just a thick edge and 4 heavy brackets, as if someone expected it to be yanked away. Ethan filmed it from several angles, since the glass caught the dim light and made the room appear deeper. Mara noticed faint scratches at shoulder height, like repeated contact from a hard object dragged sideways. Owen ran his flashlight along the corners, and he said the bolts looked newer than the wood behind them. None of that proved anything unusual, but it did not match the idea of a forgotten building. Mara pulled a folder from her bag, printed from a county file from 2009 about the same parcel. The file mentioned an observation panel installed during a short investigation into illegal activity near the pond. It did not call it a mirror, but the description fit thick glass and reflective facing with restricted access. Records conflict about who authorized it, and the signature line was unreadable in the scan. Owen said the sheriff's office never used that outpost, yet he admitted the county sometimes loaned structures to state teams. Ethan kept recording because conflicting paperwork was exactly the kind of detail his viewers loved. That evening, a couple of hikers stopped by, a man and woman from Sequim, who said they had heard about the reflection. They used that word carefully, like it was a nickname, and they laughed while saying it, like they did not want to believe it. Reportedly, a teenager came here in 2019 and called for help, claiming the mirror showed him turning away while he stood facing it. Investigators never confirmed that, and dispatch logs only showed a vague welfare check with no mirror mentioned. The hikers said locals blamed light angles and stress, but they also said the stories always returned after heavy rain. Owen told them to keep moving since the trail closed at dusk, and they left quickly. After dark, the outpost became a black box, and Ethan decided to camp inside to protect his gear from moisture. Owen stayed outside in his vehicle, parked near the trailhead, and kept a radio on low volume. Mara insisted on sleeping in the outpost too because she wanted to recheck the wall for old markings at first light. Ethan set a small lantern near the mirror, then filmed a short segment where he described the building's closure. The mirror caught the lantern glow, and the glass reflected the opposite wall with a clean sharpness that felt too modern. Mara said that clarity was unusual for a mirror left in damp air for years. Around 1 a.m., Owen radioed once, asking if they were hearing footsteps outside the outpost. Ethan listened, then answered that he heard only wind and water movement, nothing steady or heavy. Mara sat up and stared toward the mirror because she said something in the reflection was moving in a different rhythm. Ethan turned his camera toward the glass, and the viewfinder showed a pale rectangle with their shapes inside it. In the recording, Ethan's silhouette shifts forward, yet Mara's reflected shape appears to drift slightly back. It was subtle and could be lens distortion, but it made Mara whisper that the room felt split. Owen got out of his vehicle and walked to the outpost, shining his light across the pond's edge. He reported no tracks, no broken branches, and no sign anyone approached on foot. Ethan opened the door briefly, and the cold air rushed in, smelling of wet bark and old soot. When Owen stepped inside, he stood beside Ethan and faced the mirror directly, testing simple movements like raising a hand. The reflection matched him every time, at least from their angle, and Owen said the hikers were probably chasing a story. Mara did not argue, but she kept her eyes on the mirror brackets like she expected them to move. In the morning, Mara photographed the bolts and compared them to hardware catalogs saved on her phone. She said the heads looked like a model sold widely after 2016, which was not proof, but it raised questions about recent work. Ethan filmed the brackets up close and caught a small strip of black material tucked behind the glass edge. Owen used his knife tip carefully, pulling out a thin gasket like those used for window installs, not decorative mirrors. Reportedly, two-way glass uses similar gaskets depending on mount style and pressure requirements. No one said two-way mirror out loud, but the thought settled into the room like a weight. They searched the outpost for wiring, vents, or any space behind the wall that could hide equipment. In the storage closet, Ethan found a metal conduit that disappeared into a boarded panel, and the wood around it showed newer nails. Owen pried the panel just enough to look, and he saw an empty cavity with a dangling cut cable. Mara said the county file from 2009 mentioned temporary power runs for surveillance support, then claimed removal was completed. Dispatch logs did not list that work, and state records showed no permit for electrical alterations at that site. Ethan kept filming, since the story was turning from folklore into disputed infrastructure. At midday, Owen called a contact in the county office, asking about the outpost status and any recent maintenance. The contact said the building was inactive, yet also said a contractor checked for storm damage in 2020. That date was not on Mara's printed records, which ended at 2019 with a note about site secure. Records conflict here, because another archived note claimed the pond trail was fully closed in 2021 after repeated vandalism. Mara suggested the mirror might have been installed as a deterrent, meant to make intruders feel visible. Owen said that theory was plausible, and he pointed out that fear can spread faster than facts. Ethan did not comment because his role was to document, not decide. They hiked around the pond and found a narrow rise where the ground stayed oddly level, like a platform once sat there. Ethan filmed the area, and his boots sank slightly in mud that felt recently disturbed. Mara located broken plastic in the brush, the kind used for outdoor electrical boxes, and it looked newer than the surrounding debris. Owen marked the spot with bright tape, then called it in, so it appeared in the day's incident note. Reportedly, older calls from this location mentioned lights in the outpost during storms, though investigators never confirmed a power source. The pond itself remained still, reflecting the outpost in a way that made distance hard to judge. Late that afternoon, a second visitor arrived, a middle-aged man who introduced himself as Trent Waller. He said he was a volunteer who helped maintain trails, though he did not show credentials. Trent claimed he came because he saw their vehicle earlier and worried they might be vandals. Owen asked direct questions, and Trent answered politely, but his timeline shifted when asked about recent repairs. He said no one touched the outpost after 2011, then seconds later he mentioned a cleanup crew after a storm in 2019. Mara wrote those statements down, because inconsistencies mattered more than tone. Ethan filmed Trent's hands, and later the footage showed mud on his knuckles like he had been digging. Trent walked inside and looked at the mirror without flinching, like he expected it to be there. He told them the mirror was just a mirror, installed long ago to make the room brighter for staff. Mara asked why it was bolted like industrial glass, and Trent said Rangers used whatever hardware they had. Owen asked about the conduit and the cut cable, and Trent said teenagers broke things for fun. None of those answers matched Mara's county file from 2009, which used formal language about observation. When Trent left, he took a path that did not lead back to the main trail, and Owen watched him until trees swallowed his outline. That night, Ethan reviewed footage on his laptop, focusing on the moment where Mara's reflected movement seemed delayed. Frame by frame, the delay was inconsistent, sometimes present and sometimes not, which made it hard to blame simple timing. Mara examined the mirror again and noticed faint smudges at eye height on the glass, like a face had been close from the other side. Owen checked the wall seams and said the paneling did not align perfectly, as if removed and replaced. Dispatch logs from 2019 included a call about voices in the outpost, yet the responding note described only a locked door. Investigators never confirmed voices, and the report ended with a line about no further action. Near midnight, a sudden knock hit the outpost door, 3 sharp impacts spaced evenly. Ethan froze. Mara reached for her phone, and Owen moved outside with his light and sidearm ready. The yard around the outpost was empty, but the pond surface rippled as if something disturbed the shoreline. Owen circled the building and found fresh footprints in wet soil, sized like an adult boot, leading toward the rear wall. The prints stopped at the wall, then vanished, which could happen if the ground changed to fir needles. Still, Owen's radio log later noted, "Tracks terminate at structure," a phrasing that fed rumor for months afterward. They returned inside, and Ethan aimed the camera at the mirror because he wanted a continuous record of what happened next. Mara stood behind him, and Owen stood to the side, both facing the glass. In the video, Ethan's reflection lifts his camera slightly before Ethan does, by what looks like a fraction of a second. That difference could be autofocus lag or rolling shutter effects, and Mara said those artifacts can produce strange timing. Yet Owen said the delay looked too clean, and he asked Ethan to repeat the motion 3 times. The first 2 repeats matched perfectly, then the third showed the same slight lead again, inconsistent in a way that felt engineered. Mara suggested an experiment, turning off the lantern and using only the camera's infrared mode. Ethan switched settings, and the mirror became a darker plane, reflecting less of the room. Owen stood closer and angled his light low, hoping to reveal edges that showed depth behind the glass. In that moment, the reflection seemed to brighten in a vertical band, like a hidden surface caught the beam. Some locals claimed that meant a second room existed behind the wall, though investigators never confirmed such a space. Ethan's footage captured the band, but it disappeared when Owen shifted half a step. At first light, Owen called for additional support, and a county inspector arrived later that morning. The inspector reviewed state records and said the outpost should not contain any surveillance glass based on current listings. Mara provided archive notes showing the observation language, and the inspector admitted the wording was unusual. They checked the exterior wall behind the mirror and found newer caulking along a seam, suggesting work done within the last few years. The inspector requested access to maintenance logs, and those logs reportedly showed entries that were later marked duplicate and removed. Records conflict again because the county system showed deletion timestamps, yet the printed audit report did not. While waiting, Mara asked Owen about older incidents tied to the pond, and he mentioned a missing person case from 2011. A seasonal worker, 22 years old, disappeared after clocking out near the trailhead, and the search ended with no body found. Archive notes said a witness saw someone standing in the outpost window, though the building was supposed to be locked. Another witness claimed the same window reflected a person who was not there, which sounded like folklore, yet it appeared in an early interview summary. Investigators never confirmed the window claim, and the final report blamed rugged terrain and water hazards. Still, that case was why some locals avoided Mirrorpool without calling it haunted. That afternoon, the inspector authorized a careful removal of the mirror brackets, and Ethan filmed every step. When the last bolt came loose, the glass did not fall, because it was bonded to a thicker pane behind it. Owen and the inspector lifted the assembly outward, and a shallow cavity appeared in the wall. Inside the cavity sat a narrow shelf with dust outlines where equipment once rested, and a small vent cut through studs. Mara photographed a stamped label on the shelf, but the ink was faded, leaving only partial letters. Reportedly, surveillance vendors often mark shelves and mounts, though there was no clear brand here. The most unsettling detail was a single fingerprint smear on the inner pane, facing outward, placed exactly where an eye would press close. Behind the cavity, there was no full second room, only cramped space between studs and an improvised panel. That finding undercut the most dramatic rumors, yet it also confirmed the mirror was not decorative. The inspector found a wire tie with a manufacturing code that appeared post-2015, adding to the timeline confusion. Owen asked how that could exist if removal was completed after 2009, and the inspector said, "Documentation often lags behind real work." Mara noted that the county file from 2009 described removal, but also included a line about future reinstallation if required. That line was not referenced in later state records, and it raised the possibility that someone reopened the site quietly. Ethan's footage stayed neutral, showing only what was visible, yet the images looked like a place built for watching. The next day, Owen tracked down Trent Waller through a volunteer registry, and the name did not appear in current lists. A local group leader recognized the description, though, and said a man like that had offered help after storms, then vanished for long stretches. Reportedly, he once claimed he worked for a contractor, but no company verified his story when asked. Dispatch logs showed a call from the trailhead in 2019 about a man questioning visitors, yet the note described him as concerned citizen. Records conflict here too, because the responding deputy wrote that the man knew details about closures he should not know. Mara added those points to her timeline since inconsistent authority was a common thread. Ethan filmed her notes, focusing on the dates spelled out in old forms, because those forms matched the county file style. A week later, the county released a short statement saying the outpost contained non-operational observation infrastructure from a prior investigation. The statement did not mention Trent, and it did not explain the newer hardware, calling it likely later reinforcement. Mara requested the complete maintenance history through records access, and she received pages with redactions that removed names and vendor lines. Archived notes she found at a local library referenced mirror deterrence, a tactic used to reduce break-ins at remote sites. Investigators never confirmed whether this tactic was officially approved at Mirrorpool, and the library notes lacked signatures. Ethan prepared his final cut without calling it paranormal, describing the mirror as a source of fear because of secrecy. Yet viewers later latched onto the smear on the inner pane, since it suggested someone stood behind the glass and watched. Months afterward, hikers continued to report the same story, that the reflection sometimes moved wrong or held eye contact too long. Some locals claimed the effect stopped after the mirror was removed, while others insisted it got worse, shifting to the pond surface instead. Dispatch logs from 2023 recorded fewer calls, but not zero, and one report still mentioned reflection issue in a vague note. Owen retired from patrol work the next year, and he never gave interviews, leaving his observations in routine paperwork only. Mara kept the photographs and the county file from 2009, and she said the gaps in records were the real horror. Ethan's video ended with the empty wall where the mirror had been, because the absence looked cleaner than the truth. Investigators never confirmed who used the observation cavity, and no record ever explained the fingerprint smear. Next story. Almost home. Ethan Pierce was 34 and worked as a paramedic in Cincinnati, and he told his wife he was almost home. Cara Pierce was 31 and worked as a school counselor, and she followed behind with boxes strapped tight. They were moving to Florence, Kentucky, hoping a lower rent would steady their finances after a hard winter. Reportedly, Ethan agreed to one last assist call in Boone County, and that choice became the last confirmed record. State records show the call was a welfare check near Union, Kentucky, started by a neighbor hearing banging in a vacant farmhouse. County file from 2009 labeled the structure condemned, yet the parcel kept changing hands with no clear occupant. Archived documents from Ethan's supervisor said Ethan expected a quick look and a short written report for the deputy. Ethan parked his ambulance on a gravel pull-off and walked up alone, because the closest patrol unit was driving. A deputy later wrote the porch light was on, even though utility logs showed service disconnected months earlier. Kara waited at a highway gas station near Florence, watching her location share freeze as signal bars dropped. She called Ethan twice and heard nothing. Then she called the dispatcher and asked if his unit was assigned. Dispatch logs show the operator first said no medical unit was active there, then corrected herself and sounded uncertain. Kara began driving toward Union, staying on the interstate until she turned onto smaller roads through dark subdivisions. She later said she kept repeating the same words because Ethan always said them right before he pulled into a driveway. Deputy Mark Dellinger was 42 and had patrolled Boone County for 15 years, and he arrived to find Ethan's ambulance dark. Reportedly, Dellinger tried the cab door and found it locked, then noticed a side compartment latch sat slightly misaligned. He walked the yard and heard a faint radio inside the farmhouse, yet he could not identify the station or the host. The porch light glowed even with no flicker, and there were no other vehicles in the drive or grass. Dellinger radioed for a second unit, then stepped onto the porch and announced himself in a calm voice. Inside, the first rooms looked abandoned with dust on furniture and damp mail piles stuck to swollen wood. Dellinger saw fresh scuff marks across the hallway, as if something heavy had been dragged recently from room to room. He found a new extension cord running toward a basement door, even though his tester showed the outlets were dead. State fire records later noted basement flooding in 2019, and the stairs were described as unsafe. Dellinger called Ethan's name twice, and his voice bounced back with no answer and no movement anywhere. Kara reached the scene close to midnight and saw cruisers and her husband's unit, but she did not see him outside. She told investigators she felt relief when she heard voices inside until she realized one voice repeated a single phrase. The phrase was, "I'm almost home," spoken in a steady cadence with no change in tone or urgency. A deputy body mic reportedly captured the repetition, though later reviewers argued the words were hard to isolate. Kara tried to step past the porch, and an officer stopped her and asked if Ethan had any medical issues. Two deputies went down the basement stairs with flashlights, moving in single file around water stains and collapsed shelving. They found old tire tracks in dried mud, yet there were no fresh prints that matched Ethan's boots or their soles. Archived notes from the sheriff described a narrow stone doorway at the back, sealed by warped boards and nails. The deputies pulled the boards free and found a brick wall behind them, and the mortar looked newer than the surrounding stone. One deputy later said the wall felt warm to the touch, and he said the repeated phrase seemed closer down there. Search teams arrived after 1 a.m. and swept the farmhouse, the fields, and the creek line with dogs. The dogs alerted at the basement door and then refused to go deeper, pulling hard toward open air and handlers. A handler reportedly said the animals behaved as if a stronger scent was below, yet there was no open path beyond bricks. Investigators used a thermal camera and found a faint rectangle of warmth behind the wall shaped like a standing door. Records conflict on whether that heat pattern remained after the camera recalibrated because the notes differ by agency. By morning, the porch light was off and the bulb was cold when a deputy removed it with gloved hands. Utility company logs showed the meter had been pulled and a tagged disconnect order dated before the winter storms. Kara stood in the yard with her arms crossed tight, watching crews mark the basement area for a later warrant. She told a detective that Ethan hated basements, yet he would go anywhere if he believed someone needed help. The detective wrote her statement was consistent, but her timeline conflicted with one dispatch entry that placed Ethan available. A week later, the sheriff obtained a warrant to remove the brickwork, citing a possible concealed space inside. Workers chipped the mortar and pulled bricks loose, and the opening revealed packed earth and limestone with no cavity. The earlier warmth was gone, and the thermal camera showed only ambient ground temperature and damp there again. Still, items were found in the soil, including a crushed glove box and a torn lanyard used for an ID badge. County evidence logs list the lanyard as similar to Ethan's issue, yet no serial number remained on the shredded plastic. Kara began requesting older complaints tied to the farmhouse and nearby roads, and a clerk produced copies from archived notes. Some locals claimed lights turned on by themselves and doors opened after storms even when firmly nailed shut. Investigators never confirmed those claims, but the files included repeated calls about a radio playing inside when no one should be there. One report referenced a drifter missing in 2011, and another referenced a teenage runaway in 2014. Records conflict on whether either person entered the house because witness statements changed and some interviews were never recorded. The sheriff asked state police to review the property history, and the result was deeds with gaps and corrections. A state record summary said the farmhouse had been empty for years, yet county tax notes listed intermittent repairs. An inspector wrote that fresh lumber had been installed under the porch, and the nails looked new within the last month. No permits were filed for that work, and no contractor would take blame when asked later by detectives. Some locals claimed a man drove there at night, though investigators never confirmed plates or a consistent description. In early April, a private tow operator contacted the sheriff with a story that did not align with the official sequence. He said he was called to the gravel pull-off after midnight to move an ambulance blocking a farm gate. Dispatch logs show no tow request, and the operator lacked a receipt, yet his GPS pinged near Union. He reported seeing a man in dark uniform by the porch, facing the road and holding a radio at chest level. The operator said the man looked like Ethan from a distance, but he never saw the face clearly under the porch light. State police interviewed the operator and compared his claim to cell tower data, and the results were inconclusive. The operator's phone connected to a tower south of Florence, yet that tower also served Union during traffic spikes. A detective wrote that the operator appeared sober and steady, but his memory for time shifted each retelling. He first said he arrived at 12:10, then said it was closer to 12:40, then admitted he did not know. Still, he insisted the porch light made the yard look normal, which disturbed him because the rest of the house looked dead. Late April brought a call from a hospital in Lexington about an unknown patient dropped off after collapsing near a roadside. State records say the intake form listed a male in his mid-30s who was confused and repeating one sentence. Staff wrote the man kept saying, "I'm almost home," and he reacted violently when asked for his address or phone number. Kara drove there with a detective, but the patient had been transferred to a psychiatric unit before they arrived. The unit refused access without a court order, and the hospital said fingerprints were smudged and not suitable for comparison. The Lexington lead faded when the patient was discharged under a new name, and the paper trail stopped at that point. Investigators never confirmed the identity, and privacy rules blocked deeper review of the unit records afterward in writing. Kara asked for surveillance video from the intake desk, and the hospital said the camera had been down that week. That failure could not be verified through state inspection logs because the facility was not audited until months later. A detective wrote the claim was plausible, yet the timing felt unusually convenient and left no reliable image to test. Summer searches followed the creek and culverts, but no clothing or phone or medical bag was recovered anywhere. Divers checked deep pools near the property, and cadaver dogs were brought to the tree line for new sweeps. Reportedly, the dogs alerted twice, once near a collapsed well and once near a concrete pipe under the road. Soil samples showed nothing consistent with a grave, and ground radar found only scattered scrap metal and old fencing. The sheriff closed the active search and moved the case to missing person status, which changed the resources available. In 2020, Kara filed a request for every radio transmission tied to Ethan's unit from that night. The county replied with dispatch logs and a summary, but the raw audio was missing for a 10-minute window. Officials said the system had a storage failure, and they provided a maintenance ticket dated several weeks later. A technician report in state records mentioned a corrupted server sector, yet it did not specify which calls were lost. Kara asked why only that window mattered, and investigators had no way to prove whether it was ordinary loss or selective absence. Deputy Dellinger retired in 2021 and agreed to a final interview for the file review. He repeated that he heard the phrase "inside the farmhouse" and he believed it came from deeper than the basement wall. He also said he never saw Ethan inside and he never found blood or signs of struggle or hurried flight. Dellinger admitted he could not explain the porch light, but he noted people sometimes run illegal power from a nearby pole. Utility inspectors later said there was no hidden feed, yet their inspection happened after the house had been searched and disturbed. In 2022, the county approved demolition of the farmhouse after repeated trespass complaints and collapse. A contractor invoice described rotten beams and standing water in the basement, and the debris was hauled to a local landfill. Kara visited before the work began and stood outside the taped perimeter with a friend from her school. She told the friend she could smell antiseptic near the porch, though the friend later said she smelled only wet wood. The foreman said no radio was found inside, yet a worker reportedly heard faint talk during teardown and searched for it. After demolition, the land sat scraped flat and quiet, and the case lost its most tangible anchor for future tests. Kara moved back to Cincinnati and kept a folder of reports that grew thicker with each unanswered request. She met with detectives twice a year, and she was told the case had no suspect and no confirmed body. Some locals claimed Ethan ran away, yet investigators never confirmed financial stress severe enough to support that theory. State records showed no new bank activity and no travel documents, which pushed attention back to the farmhouse and that missing time. The neighbor who requested the welfare check was Glenn Rourke, 67, a retired machinist who lived down the road. He told investigators he heard pounding like someone striking a wall, then a short burst of laughter that stopped suddenly. Reportedly, Glenn said he saw the porch light click on, and that was when he called because the place was usually dark. County interview notes show Glenn later softened his description, saying it might have been boards shifting in wind. Investigators never confirmed the sound source, yet the call time in dispatch logs matched Glenn's first statement. Forensic technicians processed Ethan's ambulance and found no blood and no broken glass, which limited theories of force. They found the medical bag unlatched, and inventory sheets showed 2 items missing, a stethoscope and a pulse oximeter. Those items were never recovered, and state records show no pawn report or resale trace tied to Ethan. A detective wrote the missing equipment suggested Ethan entered expecting a living patient, not a simple paperwork check. Records conflict on whether Ethan carried his radio inside because one log lists a transmission and another lists none. Months later, an audio analyst reviewed the body mic recording and offered a cautious summary for the case file. He said the phrase could be present, yet background noise and compression made it hard to rule out mishearing. Still, he noted the cadence was unusually regular, which would fit a recorded loop better than stressed speech. Kara accepted the limits of proof, yet she returned to one detail, because the phrase sounded like Ethan but felt empty. On the first anniversary, Kara drove back at dusk and parked near the old gravel pull-off, graded smooth for future lots. The farmhouse was gone, and the yard was a scraped rectangle bordered by trees and creek banks nearby. She stood where the porch had been and listened, because she believed the case began with a sound and ended with silence. Reportedly, she heard a faint radio in the woods that sounded steady and calm and repeated the same phrase. Investigators never confirmed any broadcast in that area, and later tests found no strong signal at that spot on those frequencies. The file remains open, and state records still list Ethan Pierce as missing with no recovery and no arrest. Some locals claimed the repeated phrase was a prank loop played by trespassers, while others said it matched older stories in notes. Investigators never confirmed any device in the house that could repeat the sentence for hours, and no speaker was found in debris. Kara kept the last text Ethan sent, which read "almost home," and it carried no location data when pulled. Records conflict on what happened in the minutes after Ethan left his unit, and the only consistent detail is the phrase itself. Next story. Late prayer. On a wet October night in Bangor, Maine, a 911 line stayed open for 7 minutes with someone whispering a prayer. Dispatch logs reportedly show no caller ID, yet the audio file was saved under a real case number. The next morning, state records show a wellness check assigned to paramedic Daniel Rourke, age 32, already on shift. Daniel worked for a private ambulance service contracted in Penobscot County, and his route often crossed quiet roads near older churches. He was sent with Deputy Sean Kelleher, age 41, because the call mentioned a weapon in the background. The address was not a home, but an unused roadside chapel outside Brewer, according to archive notes. County file from 2009 listed the chapel as deconsecrated after a fire code dispute. The chapel sat behind a small tree line, and the lot looked empty except for a single sedan parked crooked near grass. Daniel noted the sedan had no plate on the front, which was legal, and rain hid most details. Sean checked the door and found it latched, yet the wood felt warm, as if recently handled. Reportedly, a faint voice carried from inside, but neither man agreed later on what words were spoken. Daniel called out through the door and stated his name, then waited for a reply that did not come. Sean tried the handle again, and the latch opened with no resistance, as if it had not been locked. Inside, the air smelled like damp plaster and old smoke, consistent with a long closed building. A small battery lantern sat on the front pew, still on, and its light fell across scattered hymn books. They moved slowly toward the altar area and found wet footprints leading down the center aisle. Daniel later told a supervisor the prints looked barefoot, though he admitted the tread edges were hard to judge. Sean photographed the aisle with his phone, and the images were later requested but never produced publicly. Investigators never confirmed whether those prints matched anyone who could be tied to the 911 recording. Behind the altar, a narrow door opened into a storage room with shelves and a folding table. On that table sat a cheap handheld radio tuned to a local station, volume low, with static breaking between words. Daniel reported hearing the phrase "late prayer" twice, yet dispatch audio did not include that phrase clearly. Some locals claim the chapel had a history of midnight gatherings, but records conflict on who organized them. Daniel found a person crouched near the back wall, hands over ears, rocking and breathing fast. The person was a woman named Maya Ellison, age 29, employed as a county clerk in Brewer, according to her later statement. She said she came to the chapel to pray after a family argument and wanted a quiet place. Sean asked why she called 911, and she insisted she did not, then asked why they were there. Maya had no visible injuries, but her wrists were reddened as if from rubbing against something rough. Daniel checked her pupils and asked basic questions, and she answered correctly, though her voice shook. She said she arrived around 9:30 and stayed alone, but she heard footsteps and thought someone entered behind her. Sean asked about the sedan outside, and she said it was hers, then added she did not remember parking it that way. Daniel requested that Maya step outside for fresh air, and she refused until Sean stood behind her near the doorway. As she rose, a hymn book fell from the shelf without clear cause, and both men noted it in separate reports. Investigators never confirmed whether that fall was due to wind, unstable stacking, or someone moving nearby. Maya looked at the book and said it opened to a page that was not hers, then stopped talking. Outside, rain hit harder, and Daniel wrapped Maya in a spare blanket while Sean ran the sedan VIN. The VIN returned clean, and the registration matched Maya, according to state records reviewed later by a supervisor. Sean asked dispatch to replay the 911 audio, and the operator reportedly heard breathing with faint words again. Daniel asked Maya if she used a second phone, and she said no, then asked if the audio sounded like her. Daniel offered transport for evaluation, and Maya agreed after a long pause, staring at the chapel door. In the ambulance, she said she had been sleep-deprived for 3 nights due to stress at work. She also said she heard someone reciting prayer lines in a cadence that did not match her upbringing. Daniel documented that Maya used the phrase late prayer, then corrected herself and said she meant late night prayer. At the hospital in Bangor, Maya was evaluated and released within hours, with no involuntary hold documented. The case should have ended there, yet a second call arrived 1 days later from the same chapel. Dispatch logs reportedly list the call time as 1:17 and again show no caller ID data. The audio included a steady tapping sound, and the operator wrote that it matched a pew or wooden railing. This time, Daniel was off duty, but Sean responded with another deputy and found the chapel door open again. Inside, they found the same lantern, yet its batteries were dead, and the switch was in the on position. A sheet of paper lay on the altar with a prayer printed from a website, and the ink was smeared. County file from 2009 had no record of electricity in the building, so any light source required someone to bring it. Sean contacted Maya by phone, and she answered at home, sounding confused, according to archived notes. She said she had not been near the chapel since the ambulance ride and asked why her name was mentioned again. Sean did not tell her details, yet later reports show her name was written on the paper found at the altar. The writing was block letters, and investigators never confirmed whose handwriting it matched. In a follow-up interview, Maya stated she recognized the prayer text because she had searched it years earlier after a funeral. She said she did not print it and did not own the type of paper found at the chapel. State records show she had access to office printers, but there was no documented print log produced publicly. Some locals claimed the paper looked freshly handled, while others said damp could have smeared old ink quickly. Daniel learned about the second call from coworkers and requested the audio through internal channels. A supervisor allowed him to hear it once, and he later summarized it as breath plus a soft male voice. Daniel said the voice did not sound like Maya, and he noted a faint clicking like a radio scan. Investigators never confirmed whether the sound came from the same handheld radio found earlier. Records conflict on whether that radio was seized, tagged, or left in place. Over the next month, there were 3 more calls, each short, each from the same cell tower region. Dispatch logs reportedly show that the operator could hear a prayer line, then a pause, then a muffled sob. The cadence varied, which led one investigator to suggest multiple speakers, according to archived notes. Another investigator suggested the sound could be a recording played near the receiver, which would explain the consistent background noise. No one publicly confirmed which theory was favored by the department. Sean returned to the chapel during daylight and found new padlocks on the doors, installed without county authorization. State records show the property owner was a small trust, and paperwork listed a contact who lived out of state. Sean cut the locks, entered, and photographed the interior, then noticed a neat line of pennies on the altar. Each penny was dated after 2011, and the line stopped at a single older coin from 2009. Some locals claimed the coins were an offering, but investigators never confirmed any religious group connection. Maya was questioned again because her work involved older county archives, including property files and death records. She said she had looked up the chapel history after the first night because she wanted to understand why it felt familiar. County file from 2009 contained a note about a volunteer custodian named Calvin Bryce, age 58, who died months later. Maya said she did not know Calvin, yet she admitted she had read his name and felt unsettled. Records conflict on whether Calvin died of illness or an accidental fall at a nearby riverbank. Daniel searched public obituaries and found Calvin's death listed as sudden with a brief service held in Brewer. He told Sean that the prayer heard on the recordings sounded like a line from Calvin's published memorial pamphlet. Sean asked how Daniel could know that, and Daniel said he recognized the phrasing from his own family services. Investigators never confirmed the pamphlet connection, and the department did not add it to the official case summary. Some locals claimed Calvin had led informal prayer meetings at the chapel, but state records do not list any permit for gatherings. A break came when a dispatcher noticed that each call ended exactly when the operator asked for a name. Reportedly, the caller never spoke during questions, only during the prayer lines, which seemed timed. A county technician reviewed the recordings and wrote that the audio had compression artifacts consistent with a playback device. Another technician wrote that the breathing sounded live, not recorded, and that the rhythm shifted naturally. Records conflict, and neither report was signed in a way that allowed easy verification. Sean requested a tower dump for the call windows, and a limited list was produced, according to archived notes. One number appeared twice near the chapel during the calls, yet it was not linked to Maya. The subscriber information was a prepaid account purchased in Portland, Maine in 2019, paid with cash. Investigators never confirmed who bought it, and the store camera footage was reportedly overwritten. Some locals claimed a young man had bragged about prank calls, but the claim was never supported by dispatch logs. Daniel asked to ride along during a planned stakeout, and Sean agreed because the call pattern suggested another attempt. They parked near the chapel on a cold night, staying dark, watching the lot through rain-streaked glass. Around 1:10, headlights appeared, then shut off, and a figure moved toward the chapel door with a small bag. Daniel reported the figure moved with a limp, while Sean later wrote the gate looked normal and the difference remained unresolved. When the 911 line opened at 1:17, both men heard faint speech from their car radio separate from the dispatch channel. Sean approached on foot and saw the door open, then close, without any visible hand on the latch. He entered and found the handheld radio on the folding table again, now tuned to a different frequency. The figure was gone, and the only movement was the radio's scan light blinking in a steady pattern. Daniel stayed outside and heard a low voice through the chapel walls. Then silence, then a quick shuffle. Investigators never confirmed whether the voice came from inside or from a nearby vehicle on the road. Inside the storage room, Sean found the small bag on the floor, and it held a portable speaker and a spare battery pack. The speaker was still warm, and its power light was on, suggesting recent use, according to archived notes. Sean called for Daniel, and Daniel entered, then stared at the table where the prayer paper sat again. The paper had a handwritten note, and it read, "Do not answer when asked," written in block letters. No fingerprint match was reported publicly, and the item chain of custody was later questioned in a county review. Maya was notified because her name was written again, and she arrived at the station with an attorney. She denied involvement and offered an alibi, saying she was at her sister's home in Orono that night. State records show her phone pinged near Orono, yet tower ranges overlap, and investigators never confirmed exact location. Her attorney requested the speaker evidence, and the department refused pending review, according to archived notes. Some locals claimed Maya was being framed to silence her, though no motive was established in any official file. Daniel later told a supervisor that Maya looked genuinely surprised when shown a photo of the note. Sean did not describe her reaction in his report, only that she refused further questions. The prepaid number was traced to another town, yet it was inactive by the time investigators obtained warrants. A county file from 2009 resurfaced during the review, noting that Calvin Bryce had once reported missing hymn books. That note mentioned a young volunteer, unnamed, who disliked being questioned and who avoided giving his name to officials. The case shifted toward identifying that volunteer, but the file did not list him, and the chapel trust records were thin. An investigator contacted former parish members in Brewer and Bangor, and several reportedly mentioned a teen who drifted between churches. Some described him as polite until asked personal questions, then suddenly withdrawn, consistent with the call pattern. Others said the story was rumor and that no such teen existed, which added another conflict in records. Investigators never confirmed whether those interviews were recorded or just summarized. In December, the calls stopped as abruptly as they began, and the chapel was boarded by the trust. Dispatch logs reportedly show no further open-line incidents from that tower sector after that month. Daniel kept working the Bangor area, and he told coworkers he avoided that road whenever possible. Maya remained employed, and no charges were filed against her according to state records available later. The portable speaker and note were logged as evidence, yet a later county audit listed them as missing for 4 days before reappearing. Years later, a records request produced the first night audio for a limited public review, and the file sounded degraded. The prayer lines were faint, and a listener could interpret different words, which led to inconsistent transcripts. One transcript included late prayer, while another did not, and records conflict on who prepared them. Investigators never confirmed whether the audio had been processed, filtered, or copied between systems. The dispatch operator's original notes remained the most detailed, and they described a voice that sounded close to the microphone. In 2019, a separate complaint came in from a nearby resident who said a car idled by the boarded chapel after midnight. The resident reportedly saw a man step out, carry a small bag, and stand at the door as if listening. When a spotlight hit, the man left quickly and no plate was captured, according to archived notes. The report was filed, then closed because no crime was observed and no entry was confirmed. Some locals claimed the man was the same figure from the stakeout, but investigators never confirmed that link. Daniel was contacted by a county reviewer during that period and asked whether he believed the chapel calls were staged. He answered that the evidence suggested a recording, yet he could not explain the warmth of objects or the timing of the radio interference. Sean gave a separate statement and focused on the portable speaker, saying it proved intent to create an effect. The reviewer wrote that both accounts were credible but incomplete, and that chain of custody gaps reduced confidence. County file from 2009 was cited again, emphasizing how little the trust maintained the property history. Maya later filed a complaint about being named in documents without evidence, and the county responded with a formal apology. State records show the apology acknowledged that her name appeared on items, but it did not assign blame for how it happened. Maya declined interviews, and her attorney stated she wanted distance from the chapel issue permanently. Some locals claimed she moved away, yet public records show she remained in the Bangor area for at least several years. Investigators never confirmed whether the note writer knew Maya personally or chose her name from county staff listings. By the time the chapel was sold, the boards were removed, and contractors reported finding nothing unusual inside. Archived notes from the sale mention old smoke stains, scattered coins, and a broken folding table, but no electronics. The new owner renovated and installed cameras, and no further calls were linked to that location afterward. Dispatch logs reportedly show the prepaid number was never used again, and it was later recycled by the carrier. Records conflict on whether the case was officially closed or left inactive, but the final memo listed it as unresolved. Even with the speaker evidence, the core problem remained, because the first call had no traceable origin and no confirmed physical caller. Some locals claimed a curse, yet investigators never confirmed any pattern beyond timing and a consistent fear response. Daniel continued to describe the voice as intimate and close, while Sean emphasized the staged feel of the scene. Maya maintained she went there only once, to pray late, and she never called for help. In the county file from 2009, a margin note reads, "Do not answer when asked," and no one could explain why it was written there. Next story. The Mirror. On a rainy Thursday in Asheville, North Carolina, a routine estate pickup reportedly turned into a case with conflicting records. A 32-year-old antique dealer named Nolan Price arrived for a listed wall mirror and left with questions. Dispatch logs later showed 2 calls about shouting, yet no one was ever charged. Investigators never confirmed what caused the panic, but archived notes kept resurfacing in county files. Nolan ran a small resale shop, and he specialized in estate cleanouts for families selling older homes. He was there because a probate attorney hired him to remove items before an appraisal. State records showed the house belonged to a retired nurse who died in 2019. The nurse had no children, so a distant cousin in Georgia handled the property. The cousin wanted everything cleared quickly, since the roof had begun leaking during spring storms. The house sat on the edge of a wooded slope, a quiet neighborhood with narrow roads and steep driveways. Nolan parked beside a sagging carport and carried moving blankets toward the side door. He noticed the power was on, which seemed odd for a vacant estate. Some locals claimed the utility had been shut off weeks earlier, yet the porch light still glowed. Nolan later told a deputy he assumed the realtor had arranged a temporary service. Inside, the air smelled like damp paper and old detergent, and the hallway carpet felt slightly wet. Nolan followed a printed inventory list, moving from room to room with his phone flashlight. The mirror was listed as 19th century style, walnut frame, front tall. He found it leaning against a wall near a coat rack wrapped in plastic sheeting. The plastic was taped tightly, as if someone wanted to seal the glass from air. Nolan cut the tape and peeled the sheeting back. Then he stopped and stared at the surface. The glass looked unusually clear for its age, with no spotting or haze. He shifted his stance and watched his reflection move, but he said it seemed delayed by a fraction. That detail sounded impossible, so he did not mention it to the realtor later. He only noted that the mirror felt heavier than expected, like it had stone hidden behind it. Nolan lifted the frame and walked it toward the doorway, careful not to scrape the molding. Halfway down the hall, he heard a soft tapping behind him, like fingernails on wood. He turned and saw the coat rack swaying, though no window was open. Reportedly, he then heard a voice say his name, spoken from the direction of the mirror. Nolan dropped the frame onto the carpet and backed away toward the kitchen. At 3:17 that afternoon, county dispatch logs recorded a call from Nolan's cell phone. The caller said there was someone inside, and he requested an officer immediately. 2 minutes later, a second call came from a neighbor, who reported yelling and a crash. When deputies arrived, they found Nolan standing outside barefoot, breathing fast, and holding his keys. The mirror lay face down in the hall, and the taped plastic was back in place. Deputy Kendra Shaw, age 41, wrote that Nolan kept repeating a single phrase. He said, "I saw her in there, and she was behind me at the same time." Kendra asked him who he meant, and Nolan described the deceased nurse from a framed photo on the wall. Investigators never confirmed how Nolan recognized her, but the photo was visible from the entryway. Nolan insisted the woman's mouth moved inside the reflection, even though the hallway was empty. The initial search found no intruders, no forced entry, and no open windows that could explain movement. Kendra noted that Nolan's hands had small cuts, likely from tape or splintered wood. She also noted a faint chemical odor near the mirror, like cleaning solvent or alcohol. Nolan claimed he had not used any cleaners, and there were no supplies nearby. The deputy advised him to leave the item and return later with the realtor present. The realtor, a 28-year-old named Marla Vance, arrived within the hour and confirmed the job details. Marla said she had not entered the house that day since she assumed Nolan would handle removal. She was surprised to see the mirror still there since it was the first item on the list. Marla reportedly suggested they skip it and focus on other rooms first. Nolan refused and insisted the mirror should be photographed for the file, then left untouched. Marla took pictures for the estate report and sent them to the attorney, then she locked the house. That night, she emailed a brief note that mentioned the mirror's wrapping and unusual weight. In archived notes, she also mentioned a prior showing where a buyer complained about headaches near the hall. That note was not in the final listing packet, and records conflict on whether it was ever shared. The attorney later told investigators he only learned about the mirror after the deputy call. 2 days later, Nolan returned with a friend named Hector Mills, age 35, a part-time mover. Hector came because Nolan wanted a witness and extra strength for the lift. They arrived mid-morning with a dolly and straps, and Marla unlocked the door again. The mirror was still in the same spot, and the plastic wrap looked newly smoothed. Some locals claimed the plastic had been torn when Nolan fled, but photographs show it intact. Hector later stated the mirror seemed normal, and he laughed at Nolan's concern. He unwrapped a corner and tapped the glass with a knuckle, then he flinched as if shocked. Hector said it felt icy, even though the house was warm for late spring. Nolan watched Hector's reflection and said it looked slightly off, like the angle was wrong. Marla told both men to stop playing around and just move it out for the sale. As they lifted the frame, the mirror suddenly tilted and thumped against the wall, leaving a shallow dent in drywall. That impact should have cracked the glass, yet it did not chip or splinter. Hector swore he heard someone whisper from inside the frame, but he could not repeat the words. Nolan reportedly froze and stared at the reflection, as if reading something behind his own eyes. Marla said she heard nothing and blamed old wood settling in the house. The three carried the mirror outside and leaned it against the moving truck, then the mood shifted quickly. Hector claimed he saw a woman standing behind Nolan in the glass wearing a pale uniform. Nolan turned and saw no one, but he said the reflection showed the figure stepping closer. Marla walked behind Nolan and waved her hand, attempting to prove it was a trick of light. In the mirror, her hand appeared lower than it should have, as if the image was misaligned. Marla described that moment in a statement taken later, though she downplayed it at the scene. She said the reflection looked wrong for a second, like a bad video frame. Nolan told her to stop moving, and he asked Hector to look from the same spot. Hector insisted the woman was still there, and he described a face with darkened eyes. Investigators never confirmed any such figure, and the mirror reflected only the sky in later photos. They loaded the mirror into the truck and drove it to Nolan's shop, located near a busy commercial strip. Nolan placed it upright in a back room, facing a blank wall, and he covered it with a quilt. He told Hector he would pay extra, then he asked him to leave immediately. Nolan locked the back door and checked each window, then he called Deputy Shaw again. Dispatch logs recorded the call, but the note only said, "Mirror secured, requesting advice." Deputy Shaw arrived after her shift and met Nolan in the shop's storage area. Nolan explained the earlier incident and repeated the detail about delayed movement in the glass. Kendra asked him to demonstrate, but Nolan refused to uncover it for long. Kendra wrote that Nolan seemed sober, coherent, and frightened, though he made no explicit claim of a crime. She advised him to place it in a secured unit and contact the estate attorney for disposal instructions. Instead, Nolan contacted the Buncombe County Archives office because he thought the mirror might be tied to the house history. A records clerk directed him to a county file from 2009 linked to a prior owner. The file included a complaint about property damage and a handwritten log of strange maintenance requests. Archive notes mentioned a mirror in the hall that kept being moved and rewrapped. The notes did not name any cause, but they referenced an argument between a nurse and her brother. The brother's name appeared in state records as a former resident who moved out in 2011. According to a probate summary, the brother later contested the will and lost. Some locals claimed he disappeared after that dispute, but investigators never confirmed any missing person report. The county file from 2009 included a line about loud crying heard at night, reported by a neighbor. It also included a sketch of the mirror's frame, with a note about hidden fasteners on the back. Nolan decided to inspect the back panel, hoping to find a maker's mark or a repair label. He removed the quilt and saw his reflection again, crisp and steady for a moment. Then, reportedly, the reflection behind him showed a doorway that was not in the room. Nolan stepped sideways and confirmed the wall was bare, yet the mirror showed a dim hall. He shut his eyes, reopened them, and the image returned to normal. Nolan later told Kendra he felt like the mirror was trying to show another place. He set the mirror face down on blankets and searched the edges for screws or latches. The frame had modern fasteners mixed with old nails, which suggested multiple repairs. As he pried the backing loose, a folded bundle of paper slid out and fell onto the floor. The paper was brittle and smelled like smoke, and it held a small photograph and a typed letter. Nolan read the letter and then called the county office again, asking how to submit found documents. The letter was dated 2011, and the author used the nurse's name in a formal signature. It described her fear that the mirror was being used to spy on her, though she never named who. She wrote that she had covered it and taped it, and she asked that it be removed after her death. The photo showed a young woman in nursing whites standing beside the same mirror in a different house. Records conflict on whether the photo was taken in Asheville, but the frame pattern matched. When Nolan brought the documents to the county office, staff logged them as property evidence for review. A supervisor noted that the letter had no official seal and could have been a personal note. Reportedly, an archivist mentioned similar complaints from older households, usually tied to family disputes. Investigators never confirmed any surveillance device in the frame, and no camera parts were found. Still, the county office kept the papers since they related to an existing property file. After that handoff, Nolan tried to forget the mirror and focused on his store inventory. Over the next week, 2 customers complained that the back room felt cold even when heaters ran. Nolan said he began hearing faint knocking after closing, always from the storage wall. He checked building security video, but the footage showed only empty aisles and steady lights. State records showed no electrical issues that month, yet Nolan paid an electrician to inspect the circuit. The electrician found nothing abnormal, but he noticed the mirror was turned slightly toward the room. Nolan insisted he had left it facing the wall, and he had covered it again. Reportedly, the quilt had slid down as if pulled, though there was no draft. Nolan moved the mirror into a rented storage unit outside town, a common facility off a highway corridor. He placed it between 2 shelves, faced toward concrete, and locked it behind a roll-up door. He then sent Marla and the estate attorney a message requesting the item be removed from the sale list. A week later, Marla replied that the cousin wanted the mirror included, since it was listed as valuable. She asked Nolan to return it to the house for staging photographs, and she offered a higher fee. Nolan refused, and he provided the deputy report number and the archived note references. The attorney responded that the estate could not force Nolan to keep property, and he arranged pickup. According to dispatch logs, a civil standby was requested for that transfer, though it was later canceled. The estate hired a different mover, and that mover never filed a complaint or incident report. Nolan asked Deputy Shaw if the mirror returned to the house, but she could not confirm without a new call. Some locals claimed the mirror reappeared in the same hallway within days, wrapped in plastic again. Investigators never confirmed that detail, and sale photos from later that month did not show the mirror. Records conflict because the listing images were updated, and older versions were archived without timestamps. In late summer, Nolan received a call from Hector, who sounded unsettled and spoke in short phrases. Hector said he kept dreaming about a hallway and a woman who stood behind him, watching without blinking. He said he woke up with his hands clenched, as if gripping heavy wood. Nolan advised him to speak to a doctor and avoid the topic, since there was no proof of anything. Hector then asked one question, and he asked it twice. Where is it now? Nolan said he did not know, and he ended the call. 2 months after the estate sale closed, a small fire occurred at a thrift store in a nearby county. A county report listed the cause as faulty wiring near a back display area. In that same report, an inventory note reportedly mentioned a large walnut mirror removed after smoke damage. Some locals claimed it was Nolan's mirror, but investigators never confirmed the chain of custody. Archived notes from the fire file did not include photos of the mirror, only a description of size. Records conflict because the thrift store owner later denied ever receiving estate items from Asheville. Deputy Shaw kept a personal copy of her initial notes, though she did not open a formal investigation. Years later, she told a colleague that the case bothered her because nothing added up cleanly. Dispatch logs showed fear and urgency, but no crime scene appeared. State records showed a family dispute, but no clear motive for manipulation. Some locals claimed the nurse had suffered paranoia, yet medical records were not part of any county file. The only physical evidence was a letter that sounded sincere and a mirror that behaved normally whenever someone tried to document it. Nolan eventually closed his shop and moved west for different work, according to a business registry update. He never spoke publicly about the mirror, and he declined interviews when contacted by local writers. The estate house later sold again, and renovation permits show the hallway wall was replaced in 2024. No permit mentioned a mirror removal, and no contractor log referenced hidden compartments. The county file from 2009 remains archived, with notes that end without conclusions. In the end, the mirror's path is uncertain, and the accounts remain contradictory, reportedly by design or by coincidence.